Hey guys, real quick, this video is brought to you by Wren. Wren is a very easy way to make a difference in the climate crisis. It's a website that you can calculate your carbon footprint on, then offset it by funding a diverse mix of projects like tree planting or rainforest protection. With just a few simple questions, you can find out your carbon footprint and how to reduce it. No one can reduce their footprint to zero, but you can offset what you have left after reducing. Once you sign up, you'll receive monthly updates from the projects you support. You get to see what your money is spent on with photos and details on every tree planted, every acre reforested, and every ton of carbon offset. One thing they're working on that's affected me personally is the wildfires in California. I have more than a few friends in California that have been affected by those that happen every year. They have this thing called biochar. It helps prevent wildfires by removing dead and flammable trees and then taking that and turning it into biochar, which keeps the carbon out of the air for thousands of years. It's going to take a lot to tackle climate change, but you can start helping out by learning more on Wren.co. Offset your carbon footprint on Wren. The first 100 people that sign up with a link in the description will have 10 extra trees planted in their name. And here's the video. Thank you.
Felt like crying. I felt like my life is over. You know, you're going to be single forever. And
What's your body count?
most people don't have like the test result to prove positive or negative.
Did you have to call the person and tell them you have herpes and they're like, oh yeah, I have herpes too, I guess. Hey, I'm Andrew Hales. Welcome to another edition of Chatting With. Today I'm here with Christopher. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Flew all the way from Toronto to Nashville to see me. You have herpes.
I do have herpes, the genital kind.
When did you get it?
September 2020.
What were the symptoms? What happened?
So, met up with an individual. Didn't really discuss sexual health prior because I don't feel like anyone does that. And engaged in activities one time. Nothing really happened in terms of symptoms. And then thinking nothing was wrong that time, a couple of days later we did it again. And potentially they were developing an outbreak at the time of that second intercourse. And within 2 to 4 days after that, I started getting swollen lymph nodes in my throat and crotch, dull, burning, aching pain down there, like 20 plus blisters on my pubic area.
Wow.
And basically just like...
So you kind of knew you had herpes.
So initially, before they fully developed, I kind of had like looked like friction burns. And like I was in denial, you know, this can't be herpes, I can't have this.
Yeah.
And then I went on Google and kind of put in my symptoms and, you have herpes, bro, you have herpes. I'm like, no, it can't be, no.
What's your body count?
Before or after herpes?
Before.
I got it from my 5th partner.
Okay. How did you meet them?
Dating app.
Tinder, whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get all the symptoms and then you go to Planned Parenthood? Where'd you go?
So actually this was like during COVID, so a lot of the sexual health clinics were just straight up closed.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, oh. I went like knocking around, like where can I get tested?
Yeah.
I basically went to a walk-in clinic and then told the lady like, I think I have herpes, can we check? And like she looks at it and says, yeah, looks like it. Just basically gave me medication.
Wait, so they didn't like test your blood?
No, so what they do, so like initially she said looks like herpes and I was like, okay. And if you do have symptoms, they can take like a swab and they can like take a little bit of your outbreak and they can test that. That's one of the most reliable ways. Blood testing is a little bit iffy in terms of the accuracy, so oftentimes they don't even test you. And another point is that herpes is not included on an STI panel. So most people, they may say like, I don't have herpes, but most people don't have like the test result to prove positive or negative.
Okay. Was that hard? Like learning that you had herpes? Was that like a shock?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think initially.
Did you cry?
I can't cry. I wish I could.
Have you never cried in your life?
I have cried in my life, but subdued now.
Okay.
But I felt like crying. I felt like my life is over. You know, you're going to be single forever and no one's going to accept you. And if you have sex with anyone, they're going to get herpes. Like, these are all thoughts people have.
You thought you would be single forever?
Yeah. A lot of people feel like no one is ever either going to accept them or they feel like they can never date again because of this.
Well, so going forward, are you supposed to tell people on the first date or at least before intercourse that you have herpes?
Mm-hmm. Like I always tell, like obviously.
Well, obviously, but like, is it illegal? I guess like HIV is.
Depends where you live. I don't know too much about each individual state. I think there may be some places where it's illegal, but typically like people are trying to sue over herpes, and there's no real way to tell when you got it or who you got it from. So like it's not similar to HIV, but please disclose.
Right. Common sense. Manners. So you have a girlfriend now?
I do.
You guys met on Bumble. When did you tell her?
So because of the whole social media thing, a lot of people who come across my social media, whether we like exchange that, find out before they meet me. Some people go their separate ways before, some people are still interested.
Okay. So she kind of already knew before meeting you. Does that mean she has herpes now?
Not necessarily.
Okay. It has to be like flared up.
So there is like still chances for oral herpes or genital herpes to like be transmitted by a small chance at some times without symptoms, but that's kind of like the risk that every person is at, and it's not as common as when it's during an outbreak.
How often do you outbreak?
So I outbreak far more than most people do. I just like to say I take their outbreaks so they don't have to suffer. But I've had like more outbreaks than most people have in their life.
How often?
I've had 20 outbreaks in the past 2 years.
And it lasts for like 3 or 4 days or something?
Yeah, like a week on average.
And you take some medication?
So I take medication daily, which like helps decrease your transmission rate as well.
Right.
It also helps decrease the frequency of my outbreaks, but obviously like I'm still having them. That's just probably my stress levels, but I'll say that compared to my first outbreak, which is like an 8 out of 10, my recurrent outbreak's 1 out of 10 for discomfort and effect on my daily life.
So even with a condom, you can get herpes?
In some situations, yeah.
With a condom even, you're not fully safe.
Yeah, so I'll give you like some
Scary.
examples. I personally have had like 90% of my outbreaks on my pubic area. So I don't ever get like symptoms on my actual genitalia. So hypothetically, if there's a guy out there with the similar outbreaks to me, or a woman, and they were to unknowingly have an outbreak and they still used a condom, the condom is not covering the outbreak.
What are the best ways to prevent ourselves from getting herpes?
Abstinence. So basically, after doing all of this
And
research,
maybe monogamy.
not necessarily.
Okay.
So I always use this analogy, like two God-fearing adults on their wedding night, if one of them ever contracted oral herpes non-sexually from their parent or a relative or something, one of them could end up with like genital HSV1 during their consummation on their wedding night, but they waited until marriage and they only had one partner. And
Okay.
so situations like that, a lot of people don't know their herpes status. Some people can have such mild symptoms that they don't notice ever, or they don't have symptoms at all. And because everyone has like the test results that don't say anything about herpes, you can't necessarily assume that you don't have it.
Okay.
So every human being that's like dating is putting themselves at risk of contracting oral herpes or genital herpes, but we're not always going to get it, basically.
What do you think's do you know what the likelihood is of just a random one-night stand of getting herpes?
I'll tell you this. In a study of 100 couples having sex for a year without a condom, without medication, like 10 of those couples contracted it. So
Like 10%?
yeah,
Wow.
which seems like a lot, but it's not really a lot. Like it's
So you take, what's it called again?
valacyclovir.
It's just a pill?
Yeah.
You take that every day?
Yeah.
And have you gone off it and
Yeah.
you just get more flares?
I didn't really see much of a change, really.
Yeah.
It's just for me. But some people do see like it has like dramatically stopped their outbreaks and stuff. But for me, it's more so to like decrease the risk of transmission because I want to be as safe as possible.
Right. So what kind of stigma have you faced? Have you gone on dates and they're like, oh no?
So I've never really had as much stigma as like women get, just because I feel like, I'll give you the analogy I always tell people, which is unfortunate. When girls get herpes, they say you're a dirty girl, and when a guy gets herpes, they say you slept with a dirty girl. So the kind of the stigma is more so towards women, but I've heard like, stigma from men and women, like usually just haters online.
Yeah.
Never had an interaction in person where it was like, ew, gross. And most people that I've disclosed to after a second date have accepted me and have been like open and like, oh, like what's herpes? And some people have no idea what herpes even is. So starting from like a baseline of education, as opposed to like reversing their beliefs about herpes.
How has it improved your life?
So for most of my life, I had erectile dysfunction from too much internet videos and, self-gratification.
Pornography.
Yeah.
Internet videos.
Yeah, in a sexless relationship, basically, over the course of like 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah, but you live and you learn. We're friends now. And basically, potentially, that has led to me to getting herpes because I spent the couple years after that trying to see if I would ever be able to properly have sex. Didn't ever have an orgasm through sex until after I got herpes. And the whole nofap thing as well, I kind of got into that because I wanted to see if I could like fix my ED and actually enjoy sex. And then that was kind of the 2020 stage, and then I ended up getting herpes. And then I had genital herpes and erectile dysfunction. And I basically thought, wow, my sex life is entirely over now. And I've like failed the whole nofap thing a few times. So I basically used my genital herpes diagnosis as like the ultimate motivator to like rid my addiction. So I could like resensitize here and there.
Yeah.
So I could eventually use a condom, have an erection, and actually enjoy sex. And because of that, I can now potentially have a better sex life than I had before.
Okay. What's your longest streak on nofap?
153 days.
Wow. You feel different? You believe in it?
I actually watched the nofap chatting with like just before because I wanted to see with the Fapstronaut guy.
Yeah.
And I was trying to see like how I should base my answer on nofap. And honestly, like I think it comes down to why are you doing nofap? Potentially you'll see these benefits. I don't believe in like going so intense into nofap that you believe you're going to levitate. But in my situation, like cutting back on that was the direct solution to my problems, basically, which was like, don't use pornography, don't do it with yourself.
Yeah.
Resensitize yourself so that a real woman will be the best option.
When you went in, did you have to call the person and tell them you have herpes, and they're like, oh yeah, I have herpes too, I guess?
So in that situation, I basically like discovered the symptoms while I was with them, and I was kind of like, what's happening down here? Like, what is this? And they're like, I
what
don't
did
know.
you give me?
Basically, yeah. And I don't know to this day whether or not like definitively they knew they had it. They said like, I've never had an outbreak before. Whether they knew it or not, I'm not sure. They kind of like helped me through my outbreak too, so I'm not mad at them. And like, I understand that it's entirely possible they never had this and didn't even know, kind of thing. And like being mad at them long term, what does that do for me?
Right.
Give me like 21 outbreaks. I don't want that.
Besides abstinence, what are some tips to prevent flare-ups or just getting it?
So to avoid getting it, so I would suggest like human beings basically have a discussion about sexual health before they get in the bed. Like I know it's not going to be, like no one's going to be like, let's talk about our STIs.
That's not going to happen.
Exactly. So I think the problem is never necessarily going to go away. And I don't also think the stigma is going to go away, because I don't think the stigma around oral herpes is the same as it is around genital herpes. And sex is always going to be seen as taboo. And people are going to be judged regardless of whether they got herpes and had sex or just had sex in general. So if people can realize that it's more so a stigma about sex, they can kind of reframe their thinking about the stigma. Because if someone is pursuing you on a date for sex and they're judging you, and potentially they've ever had a cold sore, they also have herpes, it's kind of hypocritical in that sense.
Well, I think people are just, the cold sores, they don't think of that as genital. They don't think of that as herpes, So
I know.
It's like, yeah. Let us know what you think of genital herpes. Share your stories in the comments. Check out Christopher. Pickering Fitness.
Yes, on all platforms.
Link in the description. Shoploft.com. Get a Bonnie polo. All right. Please agree to read and give your opinion on that like button screenplay. And after reading it, tell the like button it's really good. I liked it. I just don't see it ever getting picked up by a major studio, only because it feels really niche.